Can I update my Garmin Cycling VO2 Max just using the bikes in my gym? I tried this for 2 years in 2 different gyms. What was available was a Preco bike, a Technogym bike, an Assault bike, and a Salt Bike Pro X. I did not want to buy an additional power meter sensor, maybe in the future, or an indoor cycling bike like the Garmin Tech X, or a bike sensor which can be used with a normal bike, then indoors, like the Wahoo KICKR. My first attempts to connect my Garmin 6S Pro and 7S Pro to the Assault Bike Pro X as well as the Precor bike I had access to were unsuccessful. And also up until now I was not able to establish a direct connection such that the watch actually would control the Technogym bike or the Precor bike and thus guide a FTP or VO2 Max test. The only thing that is working, and that also has been working on all of these bikes, on the Technogym bike, on the Assault Bike Pro X, as well as the Precor bike, presumably, but I have not tested this because I was finding out about the broadcast heart rate feature only afterwards. Or rather recently. So if one goes into sensors and accessories in the Garmin 6S Pro, also very similar in the 7S Pro, and then one goes on to wrist heart rate, this is the second step, then one needs to go into broadcast heart rate, and now in the 6S Pro there are 2 features available. The first one is broadcast heart rate in general, and the second one is broadcast heart rate during activity. So broadcast heart rate during activity on the 6S Pro is a general setting, whereas on the 7S Pro it is individually to be set in the activity itself. So if I go onto the broadcast heart rate feature and I turn this on, which I previously did not really know how to do, then I have this screen here, and if I now press this button start, then basically the Garmin now transmits the heart rate to other devices. And if I now am on the Assault Bike Pro X, let's say, and I then click on ANT plus HR, so heart rate connection, then the bike automatically finds my watch. I don't know if this is by proximity, so it just takes the closest device or something else. The same is now true for the Technogym bike. On the Technogym bike I have 2 options. The first one is to connect to the device, which is then called Phoenix 6S Pro or 7S Pro. The second option is to connect to ANT and then some number. So it seems to be the case that both connections work, at least as long as broadcast heart rate is enabled. It also could be enabled if one records an activity and has during activity broadcasting heart rate on. Now the Technogym bike is a smart bike such as, or like the also Precor bike. On the Technogym bike now one can do a guided FTP test and a VO2 Max test. I did this a couple of weeks ago, but I was not able to share the results with Garmin in any way. I did the test on the bike. The result was 38 milliliters per kilogram because the resistance of the bike did not ramp up in a way such that I, with a given cadence, could actually exhaust myself enough. I don't know why this was particularly the case, but afterwards I could send the activity file, I think this was a .fit file, to my email, and importing this file, which is possible in Garmin Connect Web, not on the Android app at least, then one can import this and gets power data as well as speed data as well as heart rate data, because the Technogym bike also collects, or rather also records the heart rate that it then receives from a heart rate broadcasting device. Now one could assume, or maybe hope, that if I import an activity with power data and with heart rate data that was also very similar in terms of the structure of what a Garmin watch also would guide as an FTP or VO2 Max test, that then Garmin Connect would pick basically this data and create a Garmin Cycling VO2 Max and thus update my Garmin Cycling VO2 Max. But this was not the case. It seems to be the case that if one imports an activity manually, that the Garmin Cycling VO2 Max never updates. Only if there is an integration with Garmin Connect, from basically the software that records this to Garmin Connect. Now, to a certain extent successful, to a certain extent also frustrated by this, I then tried a couple of other things. The first one was to download an app called ERG-Zone, and I was able to connect this then for the first time to the Assault Bike Pro X. This was the first successful Bluetooth phone connection from basically my phone to the Assault Bike Pro X. I had tried for basically 1 or almost 2 years to basically connect my phone to this bike, which also sometimes worked with the Assault Fitness app, but the Assault Fitness app currently seems to be no longer available in the Google Play Store. I still have it on my phone, but connecting it to the app does also not transmit any data from the Assault Bike Pro X, such as the wattage, into basically the activity file that is created in the Assault Bike app. The only thing I think that was recorded was the duration and the timestamp. With the app ErgZone, I was able to then transmit all the data that was basically on the display. This includes cadence, this includes basically the distance, this includes also the wattage, to this app, which again is called ErgZone. The problem here was that I would have to purchase, I think, a subscription in order to then access more features. So as it looked, not as it looked, but in the app, so this is basically all the data I now can access afterwards. But during the activity, I had basically the power data, but I cannot access this power data, and I also cannot export this, which would also be something that I would have been interested in, and try to then import it into Garmin Connect and also see basically how at least have one power data graph from the assault bike. I assume that if I buy the pro subscription of this, that I could get basically the graph over time, or the graph simply, or the data over time, which would then be what I would be interested in, even if I cannot import it into Garmin Connect and then update my Cycling VO2 Max, which one also has to mention, because the assault bike does have handles. So this is what an assault bike looks like, in case you're wondering. This is the Assault Bike Pro X that stands in this gym, and because it has handles, it basically allows to output more power compared to just using the lower body, which I think the Cycling VO2 Max test, at least the dataset that basically is the basis or the foundation for the Cycling VO2 Max interpretation or estimation, is using. I therefore, because I was not getting any power data from the Assault Bike Pro X, I downloaded basically all the indoor cycling apps which I could think of, and I found. This included Zwift, MyWhoosh, KinoMap, Wahoo, then the Wahoo system app, and that's I think mostly it. Now, retrospectively, I can already state the following. The Assault Bike Pro X was found via Bluetooth by all of these apps. The Technogym treadmill as well as the Technogym bike was only found by the MyWhoosh app. But now, because in my gym there are multiple devices like this, I could not identify the treadmill, for example, by using the MyWhoosh app. So I had basically a list of maybe 5 to 6 devices, and then I had basically the 5 to 6 treadmills in front of me. And this would also be true for the bikes, which then I could use to do a FTP or cycling test and then potentially import it into Garmin Connect. So what I tried is basically to have already the data visible, so in this case the speed, and then I turned all of these treadmills on, and luckily, at least today, yesterday not, basically all of them were free, not free, but free, and so I turned them on, and then I checked whether basically now speed data was displaying on the app, but none was the case. So maybe the connection was just too latent. I assume that out of these 6 devices that are actually called like treadmill, Technogym or something like this, that turned up, one of these devices would be the treadmill I am actually standing on, or then the bike I am sitting on, but I was not able to identify the device. What I now also can retrospectively already say is that if one has a file that is exported from the app that records the data from the Assault Bike Pro X, or potentially also the Technogym bike, but because my Whoosh was the only app that could do this, and it did not connect to the Technogym bike, the only bike I was able to use is the Assault bike. So as long as one records basically with another app, a third-party app one could say, and then exports this activity either by uploading it to Strava and then exporting it on Strava, which is not possible in the app, only on the website, and then one has to export it, or at least I did it as a original file. There is also the option to export it as a GPX file. I don't know if the GPX file would also include power data and also heart rate data, not just the track, because the track is usually used in routes. For example, one can download from app Komoot for going outdoors and following a route on the Garmin app. Not on the Garmin app, but on the Garmin watch. So the following of these mentioned apps now were able to establish a connection with the Assault Bike Pro X as the only bike I was able to create a connection with, or establish a connection with. So these are the apps. MyWhoosh I was able to basically ride within the app with the Assault bike. What's to note here is that if one takes too long, and these apps load very long, Zwift and MyWhoosh load very long, and so if the connection is no longer active, one again has to press the button on the Assault Bike Pro X. So this here is the display on the Assault bike, and one has to press this button with the Bluetooth icon. If one presses it once, then one sees the End Plus HR, which looks like this. And pressing this then connects the watch if the watch has broadcast heart rate on. And this is then what it looks like. So it displays the heart rate down here. So basically the lowest thing is the heart rate. Now within one app, I think it was my Whoosh, I was then also able to get this heart rate data. So connect basically the assault bike now as a heart rate sensor that gets actually the data from my Garmin 6S Pro or 7S Pro. In all of the other apps, I was not able to do this. This here is the Technogym Treadmill Excite, which I tried, which did turn up in my Whoosh. And the Technogym bike I tried is, I think, called the Excite. Now, App KinoMap would actually have a direct integration with Technogym, but not for this part of the Technogym line. So maybe for basically, so there was one in there which was called Technogym Treadmill. There was also one in there called Technogym Bike. But for all the other, one could only use the optical sensor feature. So the optical sensor feature uses basically the front-facing camera, and then as one moves basically, as one basically cycles on the bike, it would at least approximate the cadence data. But actually this is also not really what I'm interested in. Also, to use the optical sensor feature, which then would have been the only way I could actually record Technogym data without the Technogym app and my account, which I already figured out does not integrate or sync in a way to Garmin such that it creates a cycling VO2 Max update. So to use the KinoMap features, the KinoMap app would have been the only one, and to access it I would have needed to purchase a subscription, which I didn't. I could also ride in Zwift, and Zwift is the only app that has a direct Garmin integration. But Zwift in the free version has only 25 kilometers. I think this is a monthly limit. So what I could use this now for is to do 1 to 3 of these tests. So I do a test on the assault bike, which I call the 100 kilocalorie test. So I burn 100 kilocalories on the assault bike, and I see how fast I can do this. And if over time I get faster, then my cardiovascular ability is improving. And because the assault bike now not only uses the lower body, the legs, for rotating or basically for pedaling, but also the upper body using basically these levers, this allows me to basically also exhaust myself quite at least compared to a normal bike, which only exhausts the lower body. So I can basically endurance train all of my body and therefore also hit the heart better. So in terms of testing and in terms of, so what is a test and what is then actually training, or maybe also what is final performance and what is training, what I'm thinking of is that every test is also part of the training. And so if the test itself, for example, a cycling VO2 Max test now, is something that actually only trains my lower body in terms of endurance and my upper body does nothing, then why would I have something like this in my training if I also can have the same thing just with also upper body training? This is also a problem that after a couple of years of training turned out to be, well, a problem with just riding outdoors with the bike, because also there the upper body is not trained so much. So what I actually did then is replace basically these things with the assault bike or with swimming. So currently I do have a training schedule in which I on Thursdays do either 40 minutes, not 40 minutes, but now 500 calories on the assault bike, or I do swimming, because both train basically the upper as well as the lower body in terms of endurance. But now back to the cycling VO2 Max update. But this also obviously relates to the cycling VO2 Max updating, because if I want to update my cycling VO2 Max continuously, because I don't want to just have one value, what is the utility of having one value if I then cannot correlate these changes over time to my blood pressure, to my creatine intake, and to maybe my sleep quality and so on and so forth, which now I have been able to do with app Guava Health. In app My Whoosh, I could not export the activity file directly in the app. Zwift does have a companion app which allows me to not have basically this display, which then is also landscape, and to have to navigate basically this kind of virtual game which both Zwift and also the other cycling apps are. There is also an app called Rovi, which is, I think, similar to mostly Zwift, and it does also have a direct Garmin integration, but for creating an account I would already have to have entered my credit card details, and I didn't do this because I was searching for a solution ideally that did cost nothing. So I assume it would also be possible maybe to then update cycling VO2 Max, which then was possible with Zwift. That's kind of the resolution to the video already, but it was not possible basically with exporting activities either in the app or then also via Strava. So my Whoosh, for example, could upload the activity to Strava, and then from Strava, again, I can download the activity, and then I again go on Garmin Connect Web, I import the activity, I do have the power data, as well as the cadence, as well as the heart rate, and then I do not have a cycling VO2 Max update or a FTP cycling update. It seems to be crucial that the app needs basically a direct Garmin integration or has a Garmin integration directly. I also asked previously Copilot and also ChatGPT about this, basically whether these different cycling apps had a direct Garmin integration. And mostly it told me that they all had, but then it turns out they didn't. So because there seems to be a lack of information about this, I also decided to record this video and also to collect additional data, which maybe I would not have collected otherwise. Meaning me kind of trying out these different cycling apps basically in the gym after my workouts in the last couple of days. So here, the resolution. Using Zwift works, but if one wants to ride more than 25 kilometers a month on Zwift and wants to then update the Cycling VO2 Max, which then works, but seems to not update Garmin Cycling via FTP, then one begins by pairing the devices. In this case, one searches for the Assault Bike, and then also one connects the heart rate, in this case again my watch, which acts as a heart rate sensor. The Assault Bike connects as a cadence as well as power source, but not resistance and also no controls. So one cannot control basically the Assault Bike via Zwift, one can just record what is happening on the Assault Bike. One then, on Zwift, can select any route as long as one has a couple of minutes at a high intensity, and the official requirement from the Garmin website here is, at least if one does not but record over Zwift, that one should, I think, pedal at least 20 minutes at a high intensity for a Garmin VO2 Max cycling update. So what I could do is have a 100 kilocalorie test, maybe 2 to 3 times a month, depending on basically how far I come with the 25 kilometers. And then I still have the Zwift to Garmin integration set up, and thus I can update my cycling VO2 Max maybe bi-weekly. It seems to not matter that much what one actually does in Zwift, as long as it is a couple of minutes of activity at a maybe certain a reasonable high intensity. So what I did is the 100 kilocalorie test, and I did this 3 times or 2 times, and then I did a FTP test, and the FTP test was basically interrupted halfway because I ran out of 25 kilometers a month. Nonetheless, so I did the FTP test today. This updated my cycling VO2 Max, but what did not update with this 16-minute FTP test is my Garmin FTP. So I do not know if basically just the cycling VO2 Max update is possible via Zwift, or if also there would be a possibility where Zwift also updates the FTP. Maybe I would have had to complete the FTP test on Zwift, and maybe then I would have a updated cycling VO2 Max, not cycling VO2 Max, but FTP value in Garmin Connect. This now is KinoMap, and KinoMap now is searching for the Technogym MyRun or the Technogym Treadmill, but it did not find any. In KinoMap, one has the option to connect all of these: bike trainer, exercise bike, treadmill, elliptical. And this would also be something if one maybe has a Concept 2 rower and connects this. This was kind of the initial way I got onto the Erg Zone app, because one can connect the Concept 2 rower to the Erg Zone app. And thus, I could also have maybe a rowing VO2 Max, which I don't know if is possible in Garmin Connect. Summary: I was able to basically locally record an activity and then upload it either to Strava or within the app directly, export the activity file, then import it into Garmin, but this did not update the cycling VO2 Max with the following apps. I did this with Whoosh, I did this not with Training Peaks because Training Peaks cannot record such activities. I could not do anything with KinoMap because I would have to purchase a subscription, or also I couldn't find I didn't find these devices, and I only could have used the optical sensor. I was able to do this also with the Wahoo app only, and not the Wahoo system app. And then I was also able to do this with Zwift, and Garmin itself does not seemingly have such a feature. Wouldn't it be cool if I could just have my Garmin watch and connect it to the Assault Bike and then do a FTP test guided from my Garmin watch?